Alright, it's day 2, and last night I did sand off some of the rust and roughed up some of the surfaces so I could put POR 15. I've decided not to put bed liner down right now. I don't think I'm going to tackle this in this project. I might come back and do it later. I should while it's in this configuration and have everything ripped apart, but yeah, I just don't think I'm going to want to deal with it. What I am going to do though is rip up the carpet on the other side in the driver's compartment and kind of do the same thing tonight and let that dry overnight. The bolt back there that's behind the valve cover, that was a ginormous pain. That one actually spun on me and I needed to use all sorts of pliers, locking pliers. It was damaging the threads, which made the nut even harder to take off. That was probably the worst part of the entire project. That was worse than ripping all this out just to get to that bolt. And the fact that this thing is lifted, I can't do anything just leaning over the engine bay. I've got to crawl up onto the engine, step on my bumper, my tire, the rim, bucket, whatever, and it just makes it even more difficult. So anyway, that's done. I should be able to pull out the core next and start working inside the box. My package of parts was just delivered today. I'm going to do the AC component, I'm going to do the radiator core, and I'm going to do the blower motor. I bought one of those as well. I may as well. It's, you know, I'm going to be right there, so I might as well take that apart and replace that rather than do it later if it were to fail on me. So that's where I'm at right now, and sorry I didn't film hardly anything in the engine bay yesterday. I was so frustrated that I just didn't feel like setting up the camera to watch me tear all this stuff apart. So apologize about that, but I think I did show a lot of the stuff that I was doing, just I didn't film myself actually doing it. So all right, next step. One thing that I wanted to point out, I took out my instrument cluster, and here's the reason why. It would sit right here and it would definitely be in the way. The steering column would actually be bumping that, so I wouldn't be able to pull it as far out if the instrument gauge was in there. It's a simple part to remove, so that's why I just went ahead and took it out, because I anticipated that something like that would happen. And also, yeah, I don't even know if the airbag really needs to be removed, but like I said, I took it out because I wanted the extra weight out of the vehicle. And I've seen people also keep the radio in, but again, it's kind of a heavy part, be a bit more difficult to try to move this thing around. So for that reason, I took those out. They're, you know, it wasn't that hard to get out, not going to be that hard to put back in. So, you know, make up your own mind whether or not you want to remove all 3 of those parts, but it's not necessary, I don't think. Alright, so my parts just came in. I got kind of lucky because I'm taking the box out today. So I ordered, I went ahead and got an evaporator core as well, because while you're in there you might as well replace that. Doesn't have any foam around it, which kind of really sucks. The picture showed that it had foam around it, but it doesn't. It does have the O-rings though for it. And then the heater core itself, you know, this is the reason for the entire project, but that also doesn't have any foam around it, so that sucks as well. And then since I'm back there, I went ahead and got a new blower motor. I figured, you know, why deal with trying to change that on my trip? I'll just go ahead and put a new one in. Hopefully it lasts. I mean, I know the old one works, and it works, I think, well, but I don't want to have to deal with this. The box is gonna be out. Might as well put another one of these in and just be done with it. So now I'm gonna work on the next step. Okay, in the videos, I remember, you know, people obviously disconnecting that, but I didn't see anybody disconnecting this. So that is connected all the way back here. Now you can't really see because of the light. And then also I had to disconnect this, I believe. I didn't even disconnect that harness, but it was attached right here under this plastic plate. So I went ahead and disconnected that as well. But this one has to come off because it's part of a larger wiring harness in the back, and I think once that comes off, the whole thing should pull out. That connector did not want to come apart, so I ended up having to pull the Christmas tree fasteners out and pull it, but only after I broke the tab off. So I'll have to zip tie that together just to make sure it doesn't slide apart over bumps and everything like that. So that was no fun, but just for future reference, if you pull those Christmas tree fasteners out, you can actually just pull it apart with your hand. A lot easier than trying to do it while it's attached to the wall there. If it was that hard getting out, I am not looking forward to putting that back in at all. My goodness. Trying to make all those holes line up is not something I am looking forward to at all. Alright, so something else to point out. One of my bolts fell out while I was pulling this, and this is the one that was spinning. And the reason that they spin is because they're only put in here with a really coarse thread, and then they put some kind of stuff over the top of it, I guess hoping that that keeps it in place. But when you go to take out this, the entire thing wants to move. So I'm going to go ahead and probably put some JB Weld plastic stuff on there when I put it back in. Now, because I'll be screwing the bolts back in and the threads are in the same direction, the bolts should secure nice and tight, but getting it off next time, you still face the possibility of this wanting to spin out. So just something to look at for future reference in case you have to do this again. Alright, so I removed a lot of all the screws, but you do need an 8mm socket to do that. And then I also had to use an elbow in a couple of areas because it was kind of tight and couldn't get that in there otherwise. So just go around the entire outer edge and remove all the screws, and then there's even a couple that are hidden, like down in there and there. So just go around and remove those. So this heater core has never been replaced, which I guess isn't too bad for a 99. So that's why I went ahead and got all new parts. But because of that, I need to cut the foam all the way across where the separation line is. And I'm going to have to do the same thing on the foam for the blower as well. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And then I also disconnected, pulled out the Christmas tree fastener for the one harness. Sorry there. Because I think that needs to be done for it to be separated. Maybe not, but I'll just stick it back in if not. And then I will separate the two and see what's inside. Alright, so on the bottom of the unit, you've got this plastic cover, and that needs to come off. And then what you need to do is take out this harness. Now, in order to take out this harness, this little red clip, I had to tap from underneath it with a screwdriver to pop that out. And then when that is popped out, you have to depress that plastic piece, and the red piece has to go up high enough to depress this plastic piece. I don't know how well you can see it there, see that? And then the entire unit will pop out. So now the wiring harness is loose, and you can actually start to remove the box. And then also this hose here on this canister, since that's part of the bottom box and it wants to be attached up here to this harness, so I removed that as well. Alright, so I've decided to keep this part of me being kind of a dumbass, just to show you that things don't always go the way that they should. And I've watched videos, but some things I've forgotten about. I've been struggling to try to get apart this heater core box. I didn't force anything because I didn't want to break anything. But just remember, take out the blower motor. The blower motor is holding the unit together. I can't figure out why it won't come apart on this end, and that's the reason. So, okay, so let's go through this one more time. Remove the blower motor, remove all the bolts all the way around, remove the wiring harness, and that plastic plate to get at the wiring harness, and hopefully that should be what you need to do. Let's see if that gets the job done. Well, there you have it. So I knew I had a heater core leak, and I am glad to see that it is actually that. I could smell it, but I don't know how, but this thing never dripped on my floor. So anyway, that's what it looks like down below, so I'm gonna have to clean all that out. I'm gonna have to decide or figure out how this door goes. I know that other people had issues with this, but you want to make sure obviously that this is seated properly when it goes back together. The whole thing is filthy, so I'm gonna completely clean it out and remove the rest of the core, remove the AC unit, and also put in the new blower before I reinstall all this. So I'm not going to film all that. I did remove these hoses, which I didn't need to do, but it looked like they were being hung up. The one down here obviously needed to be, but not that second one up there. So I'm going to clean all this up, take all this apart. I'm not going to film it. I'm just going to show me putting it back together. A couple of things to point out. So this part here, that will come loose. If you're looking at the bottom of the box, you can see where the fluid leaked. This is the configuration that this needs to go, and it kind of slides into here like this, and then this tab goes over that part right there. So slightly moves back and forth, but you can see that's where it goes. So that needs to be cleaned off with the rest of it. And then another thing to point out is you've got this ring that goes on the back of the part of the blower motor, and it's got these notches in it. Where are they? Right there. So there's a notch. So when you put this back in, make sure you put it in the right way, and that notch goes down there on that little part right there. So that slides down into there, and that way this door can open up without interfering. If you put it on the wrong way, it's probably not going to seat well anyway, but the door wouldn't be able to open. So I took an air hose and I blew all this out. I had it at about 100 psi and kind of kept my distance from the foam so that I wouldn't tear the foam with the air, and got the radiator fluid gunk cleaned out of here. I'm going to go ahead and wipe this whole thing down, maybe put some Armor All just on the seal areas. Like that one there doesn't have a seal, but one of these here did. Like this has a rubber seal on it right there. So you put some Armor All on that, and maybe that'll help it a little bit. But so I'm going to wipe this down and go to Home Depot get some foam for around the heater core box and the AC component, and work on that, and then work on the reinstall. So here it is, all cleaned out. I did about as much as I could without digging out a toothbrush and getting into all the grooves and corners, but it is pretty clean overall. I'm still debating whether or not I want to try to replace that foam. I'm a little skeptical, but I'll have to look into it a bit more. And then I'll have to double check, make sure I got all the vacuum lines back in the right place, looking at my old video, before I put this thing completely back together. So I just ran to the Lowe's store twice. The first time I got here, started to walk in and realized I forgot my credit card. So I had to backtrack and try it again. So luckily I have my black Jeep, there's the terrible headliner, as a backup. And I had a mode of transportation to get me here, but I came here for this stuff here. I decided to mimic all the foam that's on the old units, and I'm going to cover the new ones in the same areas. And then for the flap doors, one of them requires foam, and I'm hoping that one of these will work. So I just bought a whole bunch, and I'll just take back what I can't use. So that's what I'm going to do next, and I'll try to show a little bit of that as well. Alright, so on the old heater core, that's pretty much gone, but the foam around here is about 1/2 inch, and it goes all the way around. And then on the back here, there's also another strip. So I've got this sponge seal, air sealing tape, and got that at Lowe's. So what I'm going to do, it's just over 1/2 inch, but it should work. I'm going to wrap the whole thing around with it, and then put a piece on the back, and then I'll check the fit when I go to put it all back in the box. For the evaporator, it's got the smaller weather stripping around the outside, so I'm going to mimic that. I don't have anything this big, so I'm just going to use the same stuff I just used on the core, and just run strips down, and then hopefully it'll stick. Alright, so I tried to mimic this as much as possible. I even cut the small strip down below about the same width and put it in about the same spot. And the stuff keeps falling off. I think once I get it in the box, it should stay put and at least stop the vibration and give it the cushion that it needs to stay in place. But until then, it's going to keep popping off. It doesn't want to stay. So that's that. So for the evaporator, it's got these caps on it. And I loosened up this one, and then loosen up this one, and you can actually hear it's had pressure in it, and I'm not sure if you can still hear some of it. Yep. So at least that's a good sign that the pressure stayed in this all this time, so there shouldn't be any leaks and I shouldn't have any issues with this. So I took the nuts and bolts off. I'm going to leave these caps in so that nothing gets in there when I reinstall it, but they do have these rubber stoppers in here, so that'll keep them in place. But I don't want to try to be in an awkward position trying to take these off after it's installed, so I went ahead and did that now. So back onto the core box. This one door here has foam all the way around it. I'm going to go ahead and replace all that as well, just because it's starting to fall apart, and it's just a matter of time before it all falls off there, so I might as well just replace it all. So I'm going to go ahead and strip this, maybe take some goof off to it and clean it up then good, and apply the new foam. So I got super lucky, and this stuff just came off in strips. It didn't leave hardly any residue behind whatsoever. That was probably the easiest thing I've done in this project. So I just cleaned it up good, and I'm going to take this type of foam window seal, and I'm using this because it's a bit softer, and this is not a real thick sponge type material like around the heater core. So I'm going to go with this just because it's softer and it's about the right size. I'm going to have to do a couple of strips along the top, and then I'm going to see if I can curve it around here. The whole thing was curved all the way around in one piece. Same thing on the other side, but I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to mimic that or not. If not, I'll just have to cut squares and just make do with that. Alright, so when I took out the evaporator, this was sitting in the bottom, just a piece of styrofoam, cracked a little bit towards the top, but there's the drain hole, and that goes down there where the drain hole is. So I'm going to go ahead and reuse that just because it's still intact. And then I'll set the evaporator core in there. I'm going to set my heater core in and just test fit everything, make sure it's okay. And I actually put some glue around that foam that I just installed on that door, so that's what is in the background, the fan, getting that so that it dries quicker. So I'm going to do this in the meantime. So because this foam is a little bit thicker width-wise, thickness-wise, it was tight getting in there. It's definitely not going to go anywhere, but it does push this whole unit a little bit to the side. So when I line this up, I'm just going to have to make sure that this lines up in the proper location. And then one thing I forgot to point out is this thing does pop out. It just kind of cups the both tubes, and so just don't forget to put that back in there if you take it out, because this whole ring does seat inside the bottom part, and then the top part will come over it like that. Alright, so I'm about to put this thing back together. A couple of things to point out. Again, since this foam is thicker, I really had to wedge it in there, and it's pushing this to the side, so I'm going to have to make sure that that lines up when I close it. And then also be very careful about shoving that back in there, because you could break the plastic. The plastic duct is underneath here. I heard a slight crack. I don't think it was anything. I looked all around. I couldn't find anything. I think something just moved into place, but it scared me a little bit. So be careful when pushing that back in. Same thing with this. You don't want to put too much pressure on it, but you want it to sit in there down in the grooves real well. Don't forget to put this ring back in. And then I had my door off, and you can see I put some glue around the foam, just because I was really concerned about the foam sticking. I know it's weather stripping, but it just didn't seem to stick as well as the other stuff, so I just added a layer of glue all the way around the edges, hoping that might help. I guess time will tell, but that's still got to dry. I'm not going to be using it for a while, so it'll be dry by the time I use it. And then also make sure this gasket's in place. And I'm not sure now what those things were for, because there's no wall there. I guess I could have looked before, but I really have no idea what they're there for. But I put them in because they were there on the other one, so I put them on this one. If you know what they are, let me know. This foam padding doesn't stay, it keeps falling off, but once I put the cover on, these two pieces will stay. I had a piece here on the side, it kept falling off, and looking at this, I think it's just going to end up falling off and falling to the side, so I'm just going to leave that piece off. I think it'll be sturdy enough without it. Don't forget that little door, it's not even a door, but that plastic piece that comes loose. I pointed out earlier in the video, you need to slide that back in here. I actually put the core back in without putting this piece in, and then I realized I had it and it had to go in there, and that's how I ended up having to push this back in a second time. So other than that, I think that's pretty much everything. I'm going to go ahead and try to put this together. It is not going to be fun, but I'll film it and you can watch the comedy, I guess. Alright, so I stopped recording because it was taking me forever. I ended up having to shave just a little bit of the stripping off the core box that I had here because it was really tight. I didn't take it back out, I just shaved a little bit off the top. And then I had a couple of problems with it seating correctly all the way around. And it's just a matter of trial and error. One thing that you want to do is make sure that this ring is seated correctly. At one point it wasn't, and that was stopping me. So you want to make sure that that ring in there is seated all right. Now the big thing is that door, I think I had mentioned it before, but there's a door that swings right here. And it attaches to a gear at the bottom for the actuator, but there is no way to know if it's seated properly here. You'd think that you'd just be able to feel it, but at one point I had this whole thing together. I was able to stick my hand all the way down here, and I was able to push that door back and forth, and that meant it actually wasn't sitting here properly, but somehow the whole thing went together. If I would have installed this and that door wasn't seated properly, I would have really been in a lot of trouble. So I wanted to double check, and I forgot that I had this little scope, which is right there, and there I am. So what I did is I hooked up the scope and stuck it inside here to see if I could actually tell if the door, or yeah, if the top of the door was actually seated correctly inside the top part of the housing. And from there I can tell that it actually is. So I can see that it's sitting in there properly. So now I feel a lot better about it. I know that it's going to work properly. Glad I remembered that I had this thing. I've actually never used it before. But anyway, there it is. And I'm going to go ahead and put the rest of this thing together and hope that nothing else went wrong. I did actually break off one of my alignment tabs trying to work this thing back in. Oh well, the rest of it seems to sit okay all the way around. I'll double check it one more time before I go ahead and put all the screws back in. So now that it's all together, I am just reattaching my connection points for the harnesses. You've got to reattach all the vacuum hoses, and that I just referred to a picture that I took to know that I've got them on the right ones. I might even put zip ties around them. Some of them feel kind of loose. I'd hate for them to pop off, so I might just put a zip tie kind of loose around it just to make sure it stays on there. I'm gonna have to do something about the holes now that are created in this foam here. I'm not sure what I'm gonna do there, but a couple of things that I did do. This cover, the one corner broke off, so I just put a zip tie around it. Those holes were already there, and it'll just keep it from flopping around. And then also the Christmas tree fastener on the back of this one broke, so it won't stay on. So what I did is I drilled 2 holes into this plate, making sure I didn't drill into the actual harness. And then I drilled 2 holes into the plastic wall here, put 2 small zip ties around it, and then I'll tighten those up and it'll stay in place. Other than that, everything else looks good, and I will figure out what I'm going to do with that foam, and then this thing should be ready. And then one last thing that I did, just to fill some of the gaps. I don't know how necessary it was, but I stuck this thin foam. I just tore off some pieces, stuck them inside the gaps all the way around, and then made sure that this seal was sticking out as it should, because that's what's going to seat it around your firewall, so you want to make sure that's intact. And that should be it. I'm pretty much ready to go. There's a few things I want to take care of inside the Jeep though before I actually try to reinstall it. So I might have to wait till tomorrow after I take care of a few things. So I think that's going to be it for today. And tomorrow will be day 3. Alright, so I decided to try to get it in anyway, and I'm having trouble with the left side. I got a screw in on the right side, so I went ahead and put a nut on it. Now I'm just trying to jiggle this thing in so that it goes in. But I've checked on the other side, make sure nothing was hanging it up. I looked through the windshield. With the dash cocked, it's kind of hard to cock to the side. It's kind of hard to see what's going on the other side. But now I'm gonna try something else. Alright, I heard it snap into place. Let's take a look. Alright, they're actually in. You can see the one screw there. There's another one. I don't know if you can see that one in between the right there by the dipstick handle. The one back here I had put a nut on by hand. And then you need to make sure that your vacuum hose is not caught between the firewall and the outside here. So make sure you feed that through and that that's available. Everything else seems to be okay. I've got all my lines are exposed, and these things wouldn't sit right if those bolts were able to come in. So it looks like I am good to go. Now I can start cranking down on these bolts and nuts and get this thing into place. That was probably the hardest part of the whole thing. After this, I mean, taking care of this mess shouldn't be much of a problem. I just got to make sure all my connections are all good and tight and everything's in place, and then I'm going to go ahead and connect everything on the dash. Once I have everything somewhat connected, I think I'm going to go ahead and try to start it and make sure everything actually works if I can, and I'll film that if I get to that point or if it works. Something that I noticed is that there's a huge gap here, and rather than hope that all the screws pull that tight without stripping the plastic that goes into the back of the screw, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this board and I'm going to shove it up underneath here. And now that gap is sealed, and it won't put so much strain on the nuts and the screw into the plastic into the back of this core box, and it should be nice and secure without having to fight it. Alright, so now all 5 bolts are in. That time lapse was only of me installing 3 of them. The first 2, the one down there in the corner and the one back there, I had already been working on. So that one back there I had to use a ratcheting wrench, and that took forever because there's not much room. But there is a hose that was connected to that bottom one that I'm going to have to zip tie up top into place, because there was a clip that went around that bolt for that hose. So I'll need to pull that up and keep that taut. And then I'll need to take these plates off. These radiator hoses, I'm going to need to clip about an inch off and then connect those. After that, I will connect the AC lines and then put all this crap back together. Alright, so I think I have everything in the engine compartment put back together except for the AC hoses. And I think I have all the connections except for the radio as far as wiring harnesses go. So this is kind of the moment of truth as far as